So, today we're diving into the psychology of a really interesting and, believe it or not, growing group of people. Those who choose to have absolutely no social media presence. None. I mean, think about it for a second. In a world with billions, that's billions with a B, of profiles, where everything we do is seemingly documented and shared, who are the people with none? What's going on in their heads? What makes them tick? Yeah, let's go there. Let's explore the mind of what some people call the digital ghost. We're going to look at their motivations, their whole mindset, and, what life is actually like without that constant public feed. All right, so first things first. To really get what's going on here, we have to push past the usual stereotypes. We need to unmask who the non-user really is. Okay, so here's myth number one, and it's a big one. The idea that people without social media are just modern day hermits, right? That they're reclusive, maybe a little awkward, and just plain antisocial. But here's the thing, that's usually just not true. The reality is, it's not about avoiding people. It's about choosing to prioritize deep, in-person connections over, hundreds or thousands of shallow digital ones. These folks often have incredibly rich social lives. They're just focused on real-world stuff. It really boils down to a deliberate choice. Quality over quantity. Okay, moving on to the next big stereotype. This one you hear all the time. Non-users are just scared of technology, right? They're technophobes. Or it's just an older generation thing. They just can't keep up with the times. And again, the reality is just so much more interesting than that. This choice, it's almost never about not being able to use the tech. In fact, a lot of non-users are super tech literate. They get how the platforms work inside and out, and that's exactly why they choose to stay away. And it's definitely not just an age thing. This is a trend that's growing with all age groups, even Gen Z. The key takeaway here is that it's a very conscious, very deliberate decision. So if it's not about being antisocial, and it's not about being afraid of technology, then what is it about? What's actually driving this choice? Let's get into the mindset. Well, the core motivations are really fascinating when you dig in. It's less about running away from something and a lot more about protecting something valuable. We're talking about a real desire for mental clarity and focus, a very strong need for privacy, and a deep dislike for that feeling of constant performance, that social comparison game. At the end of the day, it's about trying to be more authentic and guarding their two most precious resources, their time and their attention. This actually brings us to a really cool psychological idea called the privacy calculus. And honestly, every single one of us does this, whether we know it or not. It's that little mental calculation you do before you post something. You think, okay, sharing this picture is worth it because I'll get likes and comments from friends. That's your privacy calculus. Well, for the non-user, that math just comes out differently. The potential risks to their privacy, to their mental peace, to their focus, they just completely outweigh any of the perceived benefits. And this quote, I think, just hits the nail on the head. The non-user isn't rejecting connection, they are rejecting a specific, curated, and often draining form of it. So let me say that again. It's not about rejecting people. It's about rejecting a particular system of interacting that for them feels artificial or just plain exhausting. And, the data really supports this. The exact numbers can change depending on the study, but the trend is always there. A huge chunk of non-users, we're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of 72%, say that protecting their mental peace is one of the biggest reasons they stay off. That is a massive, massive driver.
All right, so we're starting to get the why. But what does life actually look like when you don't have that feed? What are the real-world pros and cons of making this choice?
So yeah, there are definitely two sides to this coin. On the plus side, the benefits can be huge. People talk about having way more capacity to focus, more time for hobbies or deep work, and genuinely deeper face-to-face relationships. Plus, way less of that anxiety that comes from comparing your life to everyone else's highlight reel. But the drawbacks are totally real too. You've got the classic FOMO, the fear of missing out. You've got actual logistical headaches, like when a party is organized only on a Facebook event page. And then there's just the social hassle of having to explain to people over and over again why you're not online.
So where does all this leave us? Well, when you boil it all down, this isn't really about disconnecting from the world. It's about redefining what words like social and connection even mean to us today.
And I think this is the most important thing to remember. Being a non-user isn't about a lack of a social life. It's a deliberate choice for a different kind of social life. One that's maybe more about depth, intention, and, actually being in the present moment. So let's end with a question for you to think about. If you were to log off completely, just for 30 days, what would you actually do with all that extra time and attention? What do you think you might discover? Not just about the world around you, but about yourself.